But on a much more somber note, this morning our good dear brother Joe Maston passed away yesterday, apparently from a heart attack. So I just heard that last night. So before we begin this morning, let's bow in prayer. Gracious God and Father, we're so thankful to be here as a family this morning, to worship you, to study and learn more about your word. We're so mindful this morning about the passing of Joe Maston and his family. We ask you'd be with them. For all of us, this is a surprise and a shock and something that is very sad on our heart. We ask that you'd be with all of us in all the good things as we remember him and his life. Bless us as we go through this day and this service and this class this morning. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. You may be aware that our brother Chuck Hickman usually teaches this class, and he is out with shoulder surgery, so he asked if I would help out and participate. And so this morning and next Sunday morning I will be teaching, continuing to teach the class on Genesis. After that, I believe his son Tim Hickman will continue on until either Chuck is ready and available or until the quarter is out. As I said, this class is covering, in the beginning, the book of Genesis. Last week, Chuck covered chapters 21 through 25, which dealt with God's promises that were fulfilled to Abraham. Specifically, the command by God for Abraham to sacrifice his son. What a huge, important story that was. And then Chuck discussed the events associated with finding a suitable wife for Isaac, and then finally the death of Abraham. That was last week. So this morning we're going to continue this story, and this story of the life of Isaac, and in particular the birth of Jacob and Esau. The story of Jacob and Esau, I am sure, is familiar to most all of us. The story is about two brothers and the trouble brothers can get into. And I should know something about this because I have two brothers in my family. And I myself was a brother, an older brother with a younger brother. So this story is familiar to me as well. And these guys can look tough and often be in a rivalry situation. So that's the story also, what we're going to discuss today of Esau and Jacob. And just to let you know, I would like to confess right now that it was all my brother's fault. You see, he was the younger brother, and I wish he was here because he should hear this. He was weak. Whenever something happened, both of us got into trouble. We broke something. We messed something up. This was a frequent occasion in our house. My brother would always confess, it was not I that did this. It was him, the older brother. And as the older brother, I was responsible, right? So even if it wasn't my fault, it was my fault. That's the story today of Jacob and Esau. They had much the same rivalry, each of them trying to get the best of the other one. So begin this morning, I would like to read this account, and we're going to be starting in Genesis chapter 25. If you'd like to follow along, I'll have most of the text up on the screen, and we'll go through about chapter 27. So let's begin Genesis 25:19. This is the account of the family line of Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean from Pandam Aramik, and sister Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" And she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." A couple things to note about this. Isaac's wife, Rebekah, was childless. Now, in today's world, people are childless for a number of reasons. Maybe financial, maybe other reasons. But in the first century, or this time, in Bible times, if you were childless, it was a disgrace. You were embarrassed. You were embarrassment to yourself, your embarrassment to your husband and your father's family. Later on, we'll read that Jacob's wife, Rachel, was also childless. And you may remember what she said in Genesis chapter 30, verse 1. She says, "Give me children or I die." This is how they felt in that day if they couldn't bear children. So being childless made them feel alone, isolated, but having children made them whole and part of the family. We know that Isaac was a righteous man. He prayed for his wife that she should bear children. How long did it take for Rachel to bear children? 20 years. So Isaac, a man of faith, prayed for 20 years for his wife. That's a great thing to know. How long do you pray for things? 20 years. Another thing to note is that the two boys struggled in the womb, and God revealed to Rachel that two nations would come out of the birth of these boys, and the older would serve the younger. Now, why that's important is we know that they struggled in the womb, but one thing is that was just a precursor to their life. They would struggle through life as well. Part of this struggle was who would be born first. When they were born, Jacob had his hand on the heel of Esau as a way to pull back one brother so the other would be born first. Other things that these boys were named by their characteristics at their birth. Esau, which means hairy, and Jacob, which means he grasps the heel or he deceives. When it came time for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first came out and was red, and this whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out, and his hand grasped Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 26 years old when Rebekah gave birth. How long was Rebekah barren? 20 years. And the boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once again, two twin boys, just minutes apart, were very different, had very different qualities, were special in their own way, and each parent had their favorite. Verse 29. Once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that stew. I am famished." That is why he's also called Edom, which means red. Jacob replied, "First sell me your birthright." "Look, I'm about to die," Esau said. "What good is a birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling him his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread, some lentil stew. He ate it and drank, and then got up and left. And verse 34 said, "So Esau despised his birthright." See, like we said, boys will be boys. If you want something from me, you're going to have to pay. I don't know how many times I did this to my brother. And in this case, to pay with your birthright. So this is a new term for us, this early in the scriptures in Genesis. What is a birthright? We're not too familiar with this. In our day, yes, the older son had some advantages. But in the end, each parent treated each son pretty much the same. A birthright in biblical times was given to the oldest son, the firstborn. Firstborn is defined as the firstborn son of the father. So a father in that day and time might have more than one wife, but the very first son born is rightfully the firstborn son, the firstborn, and would receive the birthright. The firstborn received both position and possessions. The birthright, the right that was the firstborn son, took rank over his brothers and sisters. Usually the father bequeathed to him the greater part of the inheritance. In the early days, the will of the father fixed the part of the chief heir to the firstborn. The law of Deuteronomy demands for him a double portion of all the possessions and forbids favor being shown to the younger son. You find that in Deuteronomy 21, verses 15 through 17. After the death of the father, the firstborn son was the head of the family. He had to provide for the widows of his father and his unmarried sisters, since they ordinarily didn't have any inheritance rights. So Jacob, in this case, wanted to be treated and receive the benefits of the firstborn. It was a great honor. Who wouldn't want that? Sounds good, since he would then inherit both possessions and position. After the father dies, the firstborn becomes the patriarch of the family and inherits the judicial authority of the father. So we can see in this story that Esau was impulsive, selling his birthright and making an oath just for a pot of food. But I think it might even be more than that. When challenged, Esau might say, "Just kidding," or "I had my fingers crossed," or "I didn't really mean it." That's what boys do. But then it goes on to say that Esau despised his birthright. Now, what kind of son would despise his birthright? Why would Esau despise his birthright? Esau, in some way, despised the responsibility that it was to his family. He was an unrighteous son. And because God knew this, is why he predicted that the younger would rule over the older. Now that's the end of chapter 25. We're going to go into chapter 26, and see a little bit more about Isaac's life, and then we'll finish with Jacob and Esau in chapter 27. So just a few points of interest in chapter 26. First of all, who was Isaac's father? We all know Isaac's father was Abraham. And the story of Abraham is that he had great faith in God, and God called Abraham out of the Ur of the Chaldees. Now, the Ur of the Chaldees was a great city that specialized in higher mathematics. It was a place of many waters and was green and lush. But God called Abraham to go to a place he would show him. And Abraham got up and went, even though he didn't know where he was going. We admire Abraham for his great faith and his trust in God. And he was going to go to the land of Canaan, the land of promise. And you know something funny about this story? God said to Abraham, "I want you to go to this land. I will give you this land." And Abraham went. But you know, he didn't own any of the land God gave him, except the cave of Machpelah, where he buried his wife. We find this in Genesis 23, where it says this: So Ephron's field in Machpelah near Mamre, both the field and the cave in it, and all the trees within the borders of the field, was deeded to Abraham. And Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre, which is at Hebron in the land of Canaan. So we admire Abraham's faith. And God's blessed Isaac because of his father Abraham. because his father Abraham obeyed God and did everything required of him, keeping his commands, his decrees, and his instructions. But though it all was like us, know Abraham as a man of doubt as well. Let's read in chapter 26 of Genesis where something happens very similar to Abraham that happened to Isaac. So we read here, "Now there was a famine in the land, beside the previous famine in Abraham's time. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines in Gerar. The Lord appeared to Isaac and said, 'Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land there where I tell you to live. Stay in this land for a while, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and will confirm the oath I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars of the sky, and I will give them all these lands, and through your offspring all nations on the earth will be blessed.' Because Abraham obeyed me and did everything I required of him, keeping my commands, my decrees, my instructions, so Isaac stayed in Gerar." So God's promise to Abraham continued with his son Isaac. God made the same promise that he would give him these lands, that his descendants would be numerous as the stars of the sky, and all nations would be blessed through his offspring. So we continue on in verse 7. "So when the men of that place asked him, Isaac, about his wife, he said, 'She is my sister.' Because he was afraid to say, 'She is my wife,' he thought, 'The men of this place might kill me on account of Rebekah, because she is so beautiful.'" Whoa, wait a second. Isaac, the righteous man, why would he deceive the people near him? He was afraid. He had doubt. He had a lack of faith. God promised Isaac that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars of the sky. Whoa, how disappointing. But haven't we heard this kind of thing before? Didn't we just read a few chapters back? Genesis 20, 1 through 2. "Now Abraham moved from there to a region of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. For a while he stayed in Gerar, and there Abraham said of his wife, 'She is my sister.' Then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent to Sarah and took her." Wow. Deja vu all over again. Abraham's righteous son Isaac goes to the king of the Philistines, lives in Gerar, and there he tells the king that his wife Rebekah is his sister because she's beautiful. Back in Genesis 20, Abraham, also for a period of time, goes to Gerar to King Abimelech and tells him that Sarah also is his sister. What is this lesson for us? That even godly men of faith, like Abraham and Isaac, also had periods of doubts and weaknesses. Like them, we too have our times of strength and weakness. In each of these cases, with Abraham and Isaac, their lying and deception got them into trouble with the people around them. And yet, despite this, both of these men's deception, God blessed them. We also may not always do the right thing, but if we keep our minds on God, our faith in God, He will forgive us and bless us. Okay, back to our main story, chapter 27. So we're back to Jacob and Esau. When Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called for Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son, here am I," he said. Isaac said, "I am now old and do not know the day of my death. Now then, get your equipment, your quiver and bow, and go to the open country and hunt some wild game for me. Prepare for me the kind of tasty food I like to bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die." So now Isaac is very old and sounds like he's almost blind or very close to being blind. So he calls Esau, his firstborn, to go and harvest some wild game so that he may eat of it and give Esau his blessing. So what is a blessing? Being the firstborn receive the birthright that we just talked about and would also receive the blessing from the Father are all interrelated. The birthright, which we have discussed, provides status and property. The firstborn received this, but in this case, it was purchased from Esau by Jacob for a pot of food. The second, the blessing, which Jacob secured by deceiving his elderly father into thinking that he was blessing Esau. We'll read that here in a moment. The blessing is related because it's this pronouncement. The blessing was considered to be the act formally acknowledging the firstborn as the principal heir. So, as we continue on, now Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. When Esau left for the open country to hunt game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Look, I have overheard your father say to your brother Esau, 'Bring me some game and prepare me some tasty food to eat, so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die.' Now, my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock, bring me 2 choice goats, so I can prepare some tasty food for your father, just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat, so that he may give you his blessing before he dies." Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, "But my brother Esau is a hairy man, while I have smooth skin. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him and would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing." His mother said to him, "My son, let the curse fall on me. Do just as I say. Go and get it for me." So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and she prepared some tasty food just the way his father liked it. Then Rebekah took the best clothes of Esau, her older son, which she had in the house, and put them on her younger son Jacob. She also covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with goat skin. Then she handed to her son Jacob the tasty food and bread she had made. Why the deception? Was this how it's supposed to go? We know God's assurance to Rebekah that the older would serve the younger. So it was God's will that Jacob would be the heir. Certainly everything done by both these brothers was not pleasing to God, but we know that the heart of Jacob was righteous and that Esau's was not. We continue on in verse 18. Then he, Jacob, went to his father and said, "My father." "Yes, my son," he answered. "Who is it?" Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game so that you may give me your blessing." Isaac asked his son, "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" "The Lord your God gave me success," he replied. Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Come near so I can touch you, my son, to know whether you really are my son Esau or not." Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." He did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy, like those of his brothers Esau. So he proceeded to bless him. "Are you really my son Esau?" he asked. "I am," he replied. Then he said, "My son, bring me some of your game to eat, so they may give you my blessing." Jacob brought it to him, and he ate. And he brought some wine, and he drank. And then the father, Isaac, said to him, "Come here, my son, and kiss me." Isn't it funny how one lie will lead to another? Isaac said, "Who is it?" Jacob said, "I am Esau, your firstborn." Isaac said, "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" Jacob said, "The Lord your God gave me success." Isaac said, "Are you really my son Esau?" Jacob says, "I am," he replied. So he went to him and kissed him. Then Isaac caught the smell of his clothes. He blessed him and said, "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of the field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness, abundance of grain and new wine. Many nations serve you. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers. And may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed. The pronouncement of the blessing to the firstborn by the father, and the effects of the blessing, the wealth transmitted as inheritance and authority, as the patriarch of the family after the death of the father. In this case, Isaac pronounced a beautiful blessing on his son Jacob. Let's continue with the story in verse 30. After Isaac finished blessing him, Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence when his brother Esau came in from the hunt. He too had prepared some tasty food and brought it to his father. Then he said to him, "My father, please sit up and eat some of my game so that you may give me your blessing." His father Isaac asked him, "Who are you?" "I am your son," he answered, "your firstborn Esau." Isaac trembled violently, and he said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came. I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed." Then Esau heard his father's words. He burst out loud in bitter cry and said to his father, "Bless me too, my father." But he said, "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing." Esau said, "Isn't he rightfully named Jacob? This is the second time he has taken advantage of me. He took my birthright, now he's taken my blessing." Then he asked, "Haven't you reserved any blessing for me?" Isaac answered, "I have made him lord over you and made all his relatives his servants. I have sustained him with grain and new wine, so what can I possibly do for you, my son?" Esau said to his father, "Do you have only one blessing, my father?" Deception, one up on the other. This is the story of Jacob and Esau, like so many other brothers. Esau said, "He took my birthright." No, Esau sold his birthright for food. Jacob, with Rebekah's help, were seeking to do the right thing, to get Jacob the blessing, but in the wrong way. They did deceive Isaac, and the result was, as God prophesied to Rebekah, that the older would serve the younger. Isaac was planning to bless Esau, but knew that was the wrong thing, because Esau sold his despised birthright. Isaac probably also knew the Lord's prophecy that Jacob would rule over Esau, that Esau had gone against God's will also by marrying foreign wives. His father answered him, "Esau, your dwelling will be away from earth's richness, away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke from off your neck." That's not really the blessing we would want to hear. From the beginning, God set out to bless the family and the descendants of Abraham and Isaac. God made Isaac the same promise that he did to Abraham, that he So in the course of these events, God's will was done. If Isaac would have indeed blessed his son Esau, that would have been against the stated will of the Lord. Esau was unrighteous in that he despised his own birthright, married foreign women. Isaac pronounced to Esau that he had already blessed Jacob and made him lord over him. Though Jacob's deception, the Lord's will was accomplished. Some of this is hard for us to understand. Abraham and Isaac's deception and lack of faith in God by calling their wives their sisters. Esau despises his birthright and sells it. Did Isaac know about God's prophecy and attempt to bless Esau even though he knew God said the older would serve the younger? Jacob deceives Isaac to obtain the blessing. In the end, we know that all these missteps, that God's will was done. So that's our story this morning, the story of Jacob and Esau. But I want to shift gears here just for the last few moments and go over some of the new concepts we learned in Jewish culture, the importance of the firstborn. We need to understand this because Christ was referred to in the New Testament as the firstborn son. So we know that Jesus was physically the firstborn of Joseph. In Luke 2:4 it says, "So Joseph went up from the town of Nazareth to Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house of the line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. She gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him in clothes and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available to them." So Jesus was physically the firstborn son, one dedicated to God, but he was also referred to as the firstborn of all creation. How can the Son of God be the firstborn of all creation? Look at Colossians 1:15. It says this, "The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn among the dead, so that everything he might have supremacy." This letter to the Colossians, Paul calls Christ the firstborn over all creation. How can Christ be both eternal creator of all things, yet he himself be the firstborn? Some have claimed that Paul's description of Christ as the firstborn of creation means that Jesus was created, not eternal, not God. Such a doctrine, however, conflicts with the rest of the Bible. Christ could not be both creator and created. John 1 clearly names him creator. In John 1:1 it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made." First, in referring to Christ as the firstborn, Paul has in mind preeminence. This usage is firmly established in the Old Testament. For example, Ephraim, in referred to as the Lord's firstborn in Jeremiah 31:9, even though Manasseh was born first. Likewise, David is appointed the Lord's firstborn, the most exalted of the kings of the earth, in Psalms 89:27, despite being the youngest son of Jesse. While neither Ephraim nor David was the firstborn, they were firstborn in the sense of preeminence or prime position. We remember that the firstborn received authority, received leadership, and would be the judge over the family. Furthermore, Paul refers to Jesus as the firstborn over all creation, not the firstborn in creation. As such, he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. One great passage that talks about Christ's preeminence, and I will close with this, is Hebrews 1:1-9, if you'd like to follow along. In this passage, we see how Christ is God's Son, the heir, the firstborn. Hebrews 1:1-9. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom also he made the universe. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he has provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. So he became much superior to the angels, as the name he has inherited is superior to theirs. For which to the angels did God ever say, "You are my Son"? today I've become your father. Or again, I will be his father and he will be my son. And again, God brings his firstborn into the world. He says, let all angels worship him. And speaking of angels, he said he makes his angels spirits and the servants flames of fire. But the Son, he says, your throne, O God, will last forever and ever. A scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, your God has set you above your companions by anointing you with the oil of joy. Christ, the firstborn Son. That's our lesson this morning. Let's bow in prayer as we close. Our gracious God and Father, we're so thankful for everything you give us today, life, our health, the ability to be here to worship you and try to understand more about your will for us in our lives. We ask you to be with us as we show the love you have for us around us to those that we care about, and help us to encourage others to come to you. We're so mindful this morning of our brother Joe and his family. Please bless them and be with them during this time. All these things you ask in Christ's name. Amen.